Alright, welcome back. Now on to the next set of levels. Anyway, there you go. You can also find masks even in the hub. So again, there is no radar that tells you where the masks can be, but each map level of the specific level tells you if you have missed some. So they tell you that there are in the level. They don't tell you exactly where they are. So if you have missed some, you can go back later and scavenge it a bit to find it.
So what were you teabagging to that time? Like, the music is a lot more atmospheric this bit here.
I was still waiting. Anyway, next up is the Underworld. Really? Okay.
Wow,
In this
already?
in this case it's not intended as in the afterlife, but more like something that was built underground.
The only other Underworld I know is the band.
What about the movie series? Have you seen something of that, Lives?
No.
Oh, you're
Good,
missing
because
out.
okay. I like the first movie. Everything else, not so much.
I heard it was like a less egregious version of the Resident Evil movies.
Well, okay.
It's a bit of an approximation, I guess, but
It depends on in what way they meant with that.
Well, you know how the Resident Evil movies eventually deteriorated into just Paul W.S. Anderson saying,
look at my wife, yeah.
Yeah. Underworld was kind of the same because Kate Beckinsale at the time was married to Len Wiseman, who was the head of the series pretty much, except he only did like one or two of the movies.
Not only that, but from what I recall, it was actually supposed to be a series about her, seeing as how Underworld is her last name.
Actually, I don't think so. I don't remember what's the last name of protagonist, but I don't think it's Underworld. The idea about it is the fact that both the Lycans and the vampires are operating in the shadows of the human society and fighting each other.
I may be misremembering, but I recall that she was supposed to be like the main protagonist of that series.
She still is, but I don't think she was called Underworld. Let me check just to be sure.
I feel like she was called
I remember seeing a lot the prequel movie in theaters because it was in a period where I did not had much to do in the afternoon, and my local cinema was offering actual, tickets on sales for that kind of movie. So I'm like, oh, why the fuck not? I got nothing better to do. There we go. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, your character is called Celine. She doesn't have a last name.
Maybe it was just the movie that called her Underworld or something. I'm trying to remember. I really do feel like
Underworld. 2003 movie, Lycans versus Vampires. I don't know.
Davy Jones as one of the main bad guys. That was awesome.
You know what? Let me just look this up.
Okay, apparently I didn't know this one. Apparently there was a copyright infringement of White Wolf Incorporated in it. I didn't even know that.
Oh my god.
Because of Vampire the Masquerade and Werewolf the Apocalypse.
Oh.
What?
Dej, it was done in 2003 at the pinnacle of the angsty, edgy period of mid 2000. So I can imagine.
There's 5 movies. I know this because I remember that outfit from the second movie.
Mm-hmm.
Are these movies good or are they actually bad?
Like I said, I think the first one has legitimately some good ideas in mind, at least for the setting and all. But I believe they deteriorate over the years. The prequel movie is the closest one that gets back to how the original was, but that's pretty much it.
At best, they're an acquired taste. It's definitely up to you to judge.
That doesn't fill me with confidence.
No, it does. It shouldn't.
It's not supposed to.
They also feel, yeah.
There were also some. There was also a collection of mini animated shorts called The Endless War, but I haven't seen that. Also, apparently there's also a video game based on it in 2004, done by literal Who developers. That's very reassuring.
Like, okay, there are
And it
definitely
was
some.
released only in Europe. Oh my god.
There are some
Terrible.
cases where that
Close
does
it.
work out, but yeah, usually whenever you get somebody who has little to no resume, that's often not a good sign. I can think of like maybe 10 times I've seen that work out. And you know,
Even so, usually, remember, it was the PS2 era. It was a PS2 exclusive, mind you. That meant at the time, if you were a developer, it was even going to be your breaking out moment, or you were going to be forgotten. And apparently, I think these guys was called Lucky Chicken. Oh my God, they're the guys who did Aquaman Battle for Atlantis. Oh, that's disgusting. Let me remove this page from my internet history. Jesus Christ.
damn. Well, you know what they say to you: honor among thieves. That explains the shared quality of the two games.
To be fair, I haven't seen anything about the Dead Underworld video game, so I don't know.
Yeah. But
Anyway,
considering
you
that
might
they
notice-
did Aquaman Battle of Atlantis, to quote Deads, that doesn't fill me with confidence.
No, I agree. Anyway, you notice that now human enemies have started appearing. These are kind of like undead creatures, so they're not like humans with a conscience or anything. So feel free to chop them away. But they also are a bit spongy. They take a bit of time to and a bit of hits to actually defeat. So your best strategy, something that I not employ here, is to do a smash style combo. Use a launcher move and then jump in the air and start hacking them. It's pretty neat. You can perform it, and you'll be able to see that in the next couple of parts. For the armadillos, again, your best strategy instead, again, provoke them and jump as soon as they hit you, because they also are able to actually jump between platforms. So if you're not careful, they can actually screw you over.
Yeah, I can imagine the narrator now. What would a platform game be without platforms? I wonder if there are any extra lives out there.
Thankfully, this is not that kind of game. Due to the atmospheric value, they don't really have. Again, I don't believe this is one case where having the characters not having an internal monologue with 2 seconds actually works for the better. It's kind of weird because if your game entirely has to rely upon it, like say Prince of Persia Warrior Within, it's more detrimental when it doesn't happen. But in this case, where you don't really need to, this is not a kind of game where you need to empathize with the protagonist, have to put in his shoes or something. So I think it's personally pretty just fine, the fact that you don't have to hear what this character has to think all the time. There we go. Which contributes to, again, a more arcade experience. In fact, one of the options from the main menu is to play the game without actually the narration if you want, for an actual arcade mode, if you want for some speedrunning times. So I get the idea that developers also knew about this kind of thing. Again, another thing kind of picked up from shooters like Ikaruga. So there we go. Also, you notice that more and more shadow magic platforms start appearing here, which is your hint that's the next power-up that you're gonna get. Frankly, the game is very generous in handling you the important tools right at the beginning and only in the still cool stuff, but only ones we don't really immediately need later on. Hello. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Also, when you get an extra heart, you're not able to pick it up, as you have seen, but it stays there. It actually doesn't disappear. So if you get hurt, you can actually return later on if you haven't died, and you can actually collect it. So again, another neat addition that feels just natural, even though so many games don't actually do that for some reason. Also, there you go. Another type of normal enemy is that kind of swordsman, the kind of samurai guy that does kind of a dash move, and you can actually stun lock him. meaning that if it sees you, if you know like jump and dodge, it's a guaranteed hit. With other enemies, you can actually stun lock them with your normal attacks, so you can rely on that. But with this one, unless you actually take them by behind, by surprise, you will not be able to actually avoid being hit. So watch out. Which is best indicate also to avoid them if possible. Ow. There we go. The game also has a bit of a generals kind of system where if you are in a pinch, as in like one heart container only, the enemies has a much higher probability of dropping an actual heart to you to replenish. But don't rely too much on it because otherwise you will find yourself dead. Always try to keep your hearts to the always at max, which again feels like a weird normal statement, but a lot of times you think, oh, whatever, I'll just keep my health low and the next enemy will give me a pick me up anyway. Here we go. Alright, time to get the shadow power up.
There is balance in all
Mhm.
things. Light,
Yeah, light.
darkness,
Something Kingdom Hearts.
and their touch is present in
Well,
everything.
I actually think Final Fantasy
The light
14 would be a
without
good
denying
comparison
half
to use
of
now.
all
I don't know,
that
Theo.
is.
This actually sounds more like
And
Star
so
Wars.
the
They're talking
hero
about
learned
how
to accept
Well, no,
Force-
these
No,
argument
this
about
definitely
using
sounds
the
more like
light and the
Kingdom
shadow is
Hearts.
straight up Chain of Memories during the Riku segment.
Yeah. This definitely
The
feels
hero
more Kingdom
becomes
Hearts.
one's own creations.
Anyway, the switching is instantaneous and very easy, intuitive to actually perform. L1 and R1. Basically, L1 is the line, if I recall correctly, and R1 shadow, or the opposite. So the key about this is the timing. Always find yourself at the right timing on when you're supposed to switch between. And now the game, it still bit slowly, but it will start removing the kitty gloves. Now more and more enemy will appear in different type of pattern formations, as in you will find like a blue enemy near red enemies and so on, and you will need to switch in order to take them down. But if you switch, you will not be able to take down the enemies of the same color, meaning that you will have to strategize how to handle things. So again, this opens up the real true meat and potato of the game, which is again pretty neat stuff. Um, there we go. But the whole thing about light and shadow is because it's more common these days. We're much more used to it, thanks to more and more media exploring an actual grayer narrative, and trying to pose questions about it. But we have to remember that at this particular time, it wasn't as super common. It was starting to take foot, but it still wasn't like completely super common, and a lot of products, particularly also games, still operated on a black and white morality, not completely basic, but still very similar to it. So again, this type of narrative was relatively fresh. So I will commend the author for not, engaging in like a common denominator, even though in hindsight it's what it became. But at least judging from by the time this was made, I can actually see where they were coming from.
It's so basically it's kind of like exactly what it's the opposite of what Fairy Fence Ref did with its prologue, where it's like you yourself asked me to put in that clip. So yeah, it's the most generic thing ever you can think of when it comes to this.
That's kind of that's kind of sad. I already mentioned that I don't really like if I can actually guess all the bits where plot is going. I guess it, like you say, it might just be me myself spoiled by stuff like TV tropes and so on. there's a little thing TV tropes will ruin your life.
That's your first mistake.
Yeah, but there are a lot of stories that hit generic. They are basically cliche list one by one without deviating too much from the formula, but I still enjoy pretty much on their own. Like say
Sure.
the journey, segments. So I do believe there is a sort of an art in making a story a cliche list and still make it work on its own. I guess the well, okay. Keep in mind, Pedro, it's been like what 2 years since we did Fairy Fence Rap. At this point,
Every time you say Fairy Fencer F, I keep thinking you guys want us to talk about Brave Fencer Musashi.
I know.
well, not
right?
not yet, Edge. But again, I guess in hindsight, it was more of a fact that it's not just the fact that it's a generic, but it's attached to a bunch of narrative problems of its own that are not necessarily tied to, the actual tropes themselves, but a combination of a bunch. Also, sorry, man, got fucked up. This also introduced a bit to the bombs. You can only kick them and use the sword to actually push them. You only have limited time to do that. But it's very simple. You can use them to actually destroy a bunch of objects nearby. Anyway,
I just want to point something since you mentioned TV tropes.
go on.
The spirit of the site isn't meant to be like tropes are bad.
Oh
No,
no,
exactly.
absolutely not.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the mentality that a lot of people on the internet had in the early 2000s and whatnot made it out to be like, oh, tropes, these are horrible. I know exactly what a story is like, and I can criticize. It's like, no.
No. Okay,
That's also
Especially people who grew up watching Nostalgia Critic, AVGN, and Cinema Sins.
You know,
there's also it's also what made arise the meme about subverting. Now everyone wants to subvert the expectation of the audience, which is something that it's kind of sad to me because I actually kind of like the kind of concept, and instead it's ruined.
subverting expectations has legit become a bit of an issue. Like I said, it's gotten to a point where not subverting expectations is more subversive than subverting expectations, given how much people seem to think it's automatically a clever writing technique or something, when in reality it kind of feels like it's more so trolling the audience more than anything.
Alright, two things. One, Tio's point earlier about you could kick bombs and slash them with a sword. If Bomberman Act Zero had the whole sword thing, that would have been a lot more. Since for some reason you couldn't kick bombs in that game, even though you could in the more recent.
I don't have much history with Bomberman, so I don't know if he ever had a CQC weapon.
Well, considering some stuff I've seen recently, I have been seeing a lot of things where they try and subvert expectations, and most of the time it just leaves me feeling either empty or really pissed off.
Let me put it like this. When you do subverting expectations, you should do it with a sense of purpose as opposed to just going, oh, ha, you were expecting this, but I didn't give it to you, I tricked you, and therefore I am smart. Or something like, oh, well, you wanted things this way, and because you didn't get it, now you're mad. Like, it's not that simple.
M. Night
really.
Shyamalan is everyone outright thinks that they're. I don't know who's good at subverted expectations, but they always come off as M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah.
Kubrick, I don't know.
No, Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick wasn't so much about subverting expectations, but it was more so about morally gray storytelling rather than anything.
I can definitely tell you the first time I watched 2001 Space Odyssey, I had no idea what expectation needed to be subverted.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. When I saw it in the cinema, it wasn't the film itself necessarily, but the cinema experience I had. My expectation was subverted in that I heard someone snoring in the cinema for the first time.
It's no, but but here's the thing. See, the issue with that whole subverting thing is that the problem is that most people nowadays use it to existing franchises, and it can be so much easier to do that. Even if you're a writer who likes to do that, apply it to your own original stories, and people would be okay with it, like Ben Scanlon from Pixar does.
Like, not everything needs to be so. Oh, all right. Let me word it like this. You know how everyone thinks that a straightforward story and the protagonist is a nice guy that wants to do the right thing is boring and generic? Meaning this morally gray anti-hero, etc., to like trying to being so different, that becomes generic in its own way.
Well, sorry, Dej, that's the quote that all the others have mentioned a couple of times from The Incredibles. When everyone else will be super, no one will.
If everyone's super, no one will be. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
It's okay. Granted, I haven't beaten it yet, but like I know a lot of people, Xenoblade fans, hate 2 because it's not like 1. They say it's too anime, even though the first one.
The
Yeah.
first one was always anime.
Okay.
The only thing that was anime about the original
Monolith Soft
re-release-
has always developed anime-style games. Like, I
Okay.
really don't see where they're coming from.
Let me put it this way, Deji. The only
Also, Nintendo fans who like Japanese games need to stop saying that as a criticism.
And water is wet. Whatever. Go on.
Let me put it this way, Deji. The only non-anime thing about Xenoblade 1, at least in the Wii version, is the art style. And that art style was more so a result of the limitations of the platform of the time rather than so an actual intentional artistic choice on their part. Because if you look at the actual artwork of the original Wii release, it's much different than what we actually got on screen. Go ahead.
Okay. Back to the bout of subverting expectations. Let me use an obvious example, but I won't go.
Thing before Deji intervened with that. Actually, let me just see if I can finish that. Because without spoiling anything, you can do something like you can create your own original story, right, with original characters, and you can do something like what Onward did, where you have 2 acts that or even with his previous movie, Monsters University, where it feels like the movie is going for a very specific formula that you've seen a million times before. But then we reach the 3rd act, and suddenly the movie completely pulls around and turns into a completely different direction that you didn't know, and completely changes what the actual theme of the movie actually is. And when you look back, you realize that the movie has actually been building up to this anyway. You just didn't realize it yet because you were so focused on the formula that the movie was shoving in your face. So that's what we call distracting the audience from your intentions. And as a result, the subversion comes across as genuine because everything involving, well, okay, fine, I was expecting this, but I got this. And since there was no expectations to begin with, because it's an original story, it's fine. But when you do it when you do it the Last of Us Part 2 style or the Last Jedi style, then it becomes a problem because there's no commitment to the franchise's pre-established characters and lore. Go ahead.
I'll say
I don't
this.
even think
Hold on,
that's
Des.
what
Hold on, Des.
Part
Let me go this. I will say this though. I don't think just being an original franchise is automatically going to make it easier for you to be subversive. Like, I'll say this. You can be subversive in an established franchise or in an original franchise, but it can still be just as bad or just as good. Case in point, Game of Thrones. That was pretty much its own thing. Yes, I know it was based off of a book, but it was pretty much its own thing.
Well, technically, the last seasons were its own thing, like I said, Drova. So you can definitely count. Anyway, new power up.
Also, the directors are hacked.
This
Well,
might.
yeah,
This
obviously.
basically allows you to use a neutral type of attack that counts as basically a giant double-handed blade, which counts as basically 2 attacks at the same time. It's not something that you need immediately. You can actually need it, but it helps you defeat enemies in a much quicker way. Observe, like this.
Ta-da!
You can defeat a giant enemy with 1 hit. This also introduces the next type of bar, the yellow bar, which is tied to your special attacks. Again, it's pretty neat in how things are handled, and now we're going to get a couple of more special attacks attached to this.
Lovely.
Go on.
Back to what I was saying, though. With Game of Thrones, without spoiling the intricacies of that plot, if you don't want to get spoiled, the ending definitely feels like something that's meant to subvert our expectations. Like, you think, oh, it's going to be straightforward. This woman defying fate, proving that she won't be the Queen of Ashes. only for that certain character who will go unnamed to end up becoming the Queen of Ashes and quite possibly the worst of her family line whatsoever.
Gotta be honest, Jova, I wonder, it's mostly speculation on my point, but I kind of wonder if the direction that last season of Game of Thrones took was mostly because of not just a lack of direction from D&D, which they still have, mind you, I do believe they still have in both writing and directing, but also because they kind of ran out of budget. They took that Sabbath year to continue things, but I wonder if they really squandered it in jack shit, because it really... the final result really is not.
So,
I don't-
Deji, were you?
Oh,
so from my understanding, it was always the plan while with Jon Snow and that one other character.
Okay, I understand that. I'm talking about the resolution instead of stuff like, the undead.
It was always the plan. It's just that they didn't know how to get there. Because that's what the trainer wanted. But it's like,
Well, that just makes it
since
argue.
the showrunners themselves were going their own direction because because they didn't have enough reference.
Remember,
And again, there are
Yeah,
speculations that Martin allowed them to do that just so he can test the ground, how the ending was, so he can actually write his own actual conclusion that will please the fans.
that's a stretch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing we do know for certain is that those two were given the time and opportunity to make a fully fleshed out final season, but they rushed through it. Why? Oh, so they could hurry over and work on Star Wars. That's right. The very thing that was their bread and butter, the thing that'll put them on the map, and they wanted to rush through the finale just to get to Star Wars. Like, damn.
Look how that turns out.
And then Disney was like, nah,
No,
bye.
Lamau XD.
That is karma. That is deep
Now that's
karma.
subverting their expectation.
Pretty much. But yeah. Yes, Pedro?
You want to hear about a sequel that actually did successfully subvert expectations back in its day? Terminator 2. Because Terminator 2...
Yeah.
Little Prince
Oh, yeah.
too.
No. Terminator 2 is a good
Terminator
example.
2.
Go
Yeah,
on,
that's a
Pedro.
great example.
Terminator 2 actually, because if you go back and check the marketing, the trailers never actually showed that the T-1000, that Robert Patrick was actually the Terminator. When people see when the movie starts, the movie doesn't even flat out tell you which of the two Terminators is the good one.
Oh, yeah.
Because of your experience with the first movie, you expect it to be Arnold. So then it becomes very surprising when it turns out Arnold is the protector this time.
Like, okay. Like,
It's even subverting the expectations of the characters themselves, specifically of Sarah, where she's incredibly baffled by the Terminator literally telling her, "Come with me if you want to live."
not only that, but I love the lead into it. Like, well, up until, like, he does his first kill, we never see the T-1000 actually kill someone. As far as we know, he just knocks out a police officer and takes his clothes, essentially. He acts a lot more human. Whereas Arnold being back, he's violent. Yeah, again, sure, he technically doesn't kill a person, though. He might as well have with that one guy, Jesus Christ. But yeah,
Fuck
again...
you, asshole.
But yeah, seriously though, at first you think, oh, it's gonna be sort of a repeat of the first Terminator movie. Until the very moment where the Terminator comes in with a shotgun, in a case of roses, that's a nice extra touch, and blasts the T-1000, showing that, oh crap, this guy's actually a Terminator, and the Terminator from the original is a good guy now. Like, seriously, that's a good...
But you know what tried to be subversive and it failed?
Terminator
Hitman
Dark Fate.
That Hitman movie we saw.
Oh,
In
They
so...
tried to pull the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
Agent 47.
yeah.
I think
Yeah.
he's talking about the one that implied that, oh, the girl was an experiment like him, but even better.
No, because we thought that Agent 47 was a bad guy.
Oh, God.
So it turned out to be Zachary Quinto.
That's the thing.
Yes.
That's the thing. I didn't buy for a second he was going to be the bad guy. Like, and it's not just because, oh, I'm all into the tropes or whatnot. No, it's because the story itself did a horrible job of trying to make Agent 47 come off as the bad guy. Because, okay, I'm to believe that this professional is intentionally missing an easy shot against this girl. Like, no, there clearly has to be something else. Otherwise, the guy's just incompetent at his job. And gee, what a shock. Turns out Zachary Quinto was the bad guy. dun,
You can
dun,
also.
dun.
Sorry.
But
You can if you.
oh, go on.
Go ahead. If you want a more modern example, again, from the perspective of people who, from the perspective of newer kids who are now being introduced to the Marvel characters via the MCU, Infinity War also served as a subversion of expectations from their part, not to comic fans who already know what Thanos is famous for, but people who were not familiar with Thanos up until Infinity War was a thing. Of course, they weren't expecting the Marvel heroes to actually freaking lose. Like in such a big way, you know, because the movies never did that up until that point. So from their perspective, I mean, yeah, we went into it knowing it because we already know what Thanos is known for, but from their perspective, it was just like when we read Infinity Gauntlet, basically. So from their perspective, just like Infinity Gauntlet was a subversion of expectations for the comics. Infinity War serves the same purpose for the movies.
You know, one could
basically.
argue that back in the day, Star Wars episodes 5 and 6 were also great subversions for their time as well, given what they did to mix things up in the franchise here and there. But yeah.
like episode 6, you thought Boba Fett was going to become a badass. Nope, he gets eaten.
And then...
Sorry. To get that
And yeah, I know about recent development.
Sadly, we don't have a boss key yet, so we'll need to postpone this. Go on, Pedro.
To go back to your earlier point, though, Teo. Well, when I first showed you Tangled, the movie, I mean, we both pretty much agreed that yeah, it's basically the '90s Renaissance Disney formula, but at the same time, it reminds us why we like that formula to begin with. You know, it just there's nothing in it that's not predictable. From the very moment, you know exactly that the two protagonists are going to become a thing. You know that the villain is going to be defeated in some. Pretty much everything that happens in that movie is very much predictable because it's part of a formula that we've seen plenty of times. But it's so enjoyable and really reminds you why you like that formula to begin with. So yeah, there are plenty of examples of a formula
This
of
kind
a movie
of
being super predictable and yet being very enjoyable in that regard.
This, I'd argue, is the biggest problem with subversion these days. It goes off of the logical fallacy that, oh, just playing something straight nowadays is completely outdated and nobody can enjoy that. It's like...
Rex is a bad character because he's too nice.
Rex who? Sorry?
Protagonist of Xenoblade 2. That's the thing, Dej. Okay, to go back a bit on Xenoblade 2 and what you said instead, I've been replaying through this week Xenogears. Yes, a bit of foreshadowing for the audience. The first game that the people that later founded Monolith did. I can tell you that probably there will never be a game exactly like that, more like a lightning button sayer, because much like the first Chrono Trigger, not first Chrono Trigger, but the Chrono Trigger, the game in general. It feels like it's something that was concocted at the time, and nowadays people, even if they tried, will probably never be able to recreate it because there wasn't really anything major like it. Unlike most RPGs, the actual mythological and Bible references were much more directed. Jewish names all over the place. The antagonist is pretty much literally God antagonist, and your protagonist Faye is not really a nice person. Not in a sense, but he's a bad guy. But that there is a lot of angst involving him. But only in due time on that front. What I'm trying to say with this is that the only thing that I heard about Xenoblade 2 that I don't even really subscribe to that, but I can see where someone might come from, is the fact that it's the more quote-unquote lighter and softer game that Monolith has developed until this point. But I don't think it itself is really
which is the point.
Not just that, I don't think it's really a bad thing. One, it's a bit refreshing. It's a bit refreshing for the company overall. Two, I still believe it's fine because despite not being as dark as their previous games, especially like Xenoblade Saga or Xenogears, it's still a fairly dark story on its own that involves serious themes and plenty of genocide to boot, if you were nowhere to look at. And three, I still believe it's a good story overall, in general. So at the end of the day, I can't be mad on that particular front.
I think another problem with subversion these days is like, well, oftentimes people use that as an excuse to, well, mess up with things in an adaptation. Like, hell, you could argue that Mortal Kombat Annihilation subverted our expectations by making
By killing
Jade.
John in the
Just
first
being a
5
good movie.
minutes.
I said to,
We thought it was
Well,
gonna
not
be
only
good,
that-
but no.
Hey,
well,
here's,
Jennifer, I said to destroy all expectations. So,
Oh my god, yeah, it's
for
the
it.
actual tagline.
hashtag, your Johnny Cage Fury sucks.
No. Johnny Cage didn't die. He.
It turns out he was Jade all along.
Yeah, or I got another one. It turned out that wasn't Shao Kahn at all. That was his overly hammy, egotistical actor brother who pretended to be him.
Is it sad that that would actually make sense? Because, like I said, the guy in that movie does not act like Shao Kahn. He acts
No,
more.
at all.
He acts more like Melina than Shao Kahn.
It's also, by the way, they just sent you the original artwork for Shulk. When you take a look at the artwork, it has that hand-painted feel. But outside of that, yeah, the actual drawing of the character, yeah, that's pretty much an anime character.
So ironically,
Yeah,
the art
like
style.
again, it's a different art style, but I can't believe this character belongs in a Japanese-made video game.
Ironically, when you get down to it, I think that Xenoblade. Well, okay, yeah, true, that has a more painted look on it. But going off of how the Xenoblade Chronicles remake is, of course, done more so in Xenoblade Chronicle 2's art style, I can't help but feel like Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and I'm not talking about the character design, I'm talking about the art style. I wonder if Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is more in line with what the original art style would have been in mind for if, they could have...
Probably.
Transpose that to
The
the
Switch,
game.
the Switch
I mean,
being a
you've
more
seen the
powerful hardware anyway, so...
I recently, here's another example too. I was just talking about Tangle. Well, the studio's most recent film, Ryan the Last Dragon, that movie is also very much a formula movie.
I still have to see it.
You can see everything coming well enough because it's you can see basically where the movie's going and everything, but it's really a really enjoyable ride all the way through because the characters are great and the story is really well told. So
I am just gonna save it for when we do that impression video.
sure.
Or the commentary.
I guess this actually reminds me on something attached to that, similar to a thing that I asked about that movie. I think a product that reflects both sides of the, not necessarily argument, but the sides of, the thing in general is the Avatar Last Airbender series. It's a series that for most of the time actually plays straight the things that it needs to do. But the few times where it actually tries to subvert what's happening, mainly the season finales, it really feels more jarring in tone on that front.
Which you could argue.
I never got subversive.
Well, okay. To be fair, the ending of book...
Deja, the ending of book 2 was hinting all the fucking time about what Zuko was supposed to do, and instead, nope.
Yeah, like...
Granted, I will give the show credit, like I mentioned in the commentary. They actually built upon that, and decided to not just forget that happened. So they actually treated this in the chattest way possible. So kudos for that. But it still doesn't change the fact that it happened.
That's part of why book
Although,
3 is still
since we're
my
still on
favorite.
the topic of subversion, I'd like to point out that there are some indie games, to my knowledge, that do try to be like that.
Oh,
I think I can on top of my head I can think I think Owlboy maybe.
Undertale.
And a Jova.
Well, isn't that the entire point of Undertale? To present different scenarios and telling you which one you prefer.
Well, Undertale's very guise as being
The
subversive.
one time that I would agree with you is during Genocide Round, where the game pretty much tells you in your face that if you like mechanics in JRPGs, you're a bad person. And I think, that was a bit going too far.
Well,
but
okay,
otherwise, I can understand where it was
Also,
coming from.
hey Jova.
What?
Yeah, I won't go too much into it now, but speaking of subversions, subverting expectations and everything, how about Danganronpa V3, eh?
Oh,
Yeah, that's another good candidate, I guess.
Free. Oh god.
And I'm not just talking about the controversial ending either.
Ow.
Oh no. I definitely get what you mean. There is a a very subversive thing that they do with who you think is going to be the protagonist, but okay, it arguably comes off as very tasteless. And I'm not just saying about how it goes, but the revelations behind it, and it comes off as more just.
And if I recall correctly, interviews with Spike Chunsoft pretty much confirmed that the dev team, this was also always the idea of the dev team, and they always wanted it to go like this.
Wow, that kind of makes it worse, given what that ending says about the series in general. Like, Jesus Christ. Yeah.
You brought up Game of Thrones, and apparently, from what you've told me, the final seasons are completely made-up fan fiction, not based on the books at all.
Pretty much.
It's interesting because in that case, I can also count my personal Game of Thrones, which is the Netflix Anne with an E, which is the most recent adaptation of the Anne of Green Gables novel.
Oh, for a moment, I thought you were going to say How I Met Your Mother.
Well, that's a very
actually, Jova,
that horse has been beaten by this point.
Sure. Actually, topic for another time. Go on, Pedro.
Because Anne with an E does kind of the same thing as Game of Thrones, based on what you guys are saying. Because Anne with an E, the first season, not even the first season. For quite a while, the first season does follow most of the stuff from the book. But when the show starts actually trying to have its own original stuff, that's when things really become a problem. When the show is just straight up adapting chapters from the book, it's fine. It's not on the level of Takahata's masterpiece, but it's fine. But as early as episode 2, they already start immediately coming up with weird original detours for the story that all they do is just crank up the melodrama, and see, from season 2 onwards, it's entirely made up fan fiction that has nothing to do with the book or even the books in general.
Okay, let me put things into perspective with Game of Thrones here. Game of Thrones, okay, you could argue at the very least that the penultimate season, while definitely a step down, they at least did have rooms to work with it. Again, the worst thing about Season 8 was they tried to be subversive, but they did it in a season that mind you, the creators themselves pretty much handicapped the season. Again, they could have ended it in a proper number of episodes, but they explicitly chose not to rush through it. So what do we get? We get essentially so much character development betrayed. But you want to know the worst thing? You probably have heard the saying, "Winter is coming." That was the thing literally meant to foreshadow a huge and giant war. Guess what? That war is finished on the 3rd episode of the final season.
In a very anticlimactic way.
That's right. It's not even the final confrontation, and it's done anticlimactically.
Alright, boss time, actually, now. Because I got the key now.
Let me guess, the boss will be subverting our expectations.
The High Priestess. Okay, well, no, I still think you're gonna like it, Jova, for one specific reason. It's the second phase, but you'll see in due time.
Okay, let's bring her on.
Okay, Alright, Miss High Priestess, from which tarot card did you came from? The first phase is pretty easy. You need to stand down on the platforms, so she will not hurt you. You have to look for their direction in order to not being hit by the debris. There we go. And when she teleports, you need to hit her for the corresponding, different colors of magic. But don't worry, soon enough again the strategy will change. Oh, there we go. Now, okay, Java. Now it's a Propeller Knight second phase.
Oh.
Okay, to be fair, this is a common thing among a lot of bosses. Shovel Knight itself also has the second phase against Kratos that is basically like this.
Yeah.
I was mostly joking because the Propeller Knight is Jova's favorite of the Order of No Quarter, so mine as well. But again, it's pretty neat. This boss also tests your reflexes. You need to constantly be on your edge. And you don't have that much room to actually inflict damage to the boss in the second phase, so you need to position yourself well, otherwise you will lose health really quickly, and bosses do not give you actual room to to recover your health
Can you
as much as you
attack?
can.
Can you attack the hands as they're trying to crush the platform?
No.
Because I noticed that they
No,
come in different colors.
as soon as they appear, get the fuck out of dodge.
Oh, so I was wondering why they bother having them show up in different colors, because I thought that implied
It's
that
corresponding to the color the high priestess is at the moment.
Is there a pattern to the color change?
whatever color
no,
she
actually.
is.
There you go. And now for the final phase, the High Priestess will stay in the center, but occasionally will charge these big fuck you lasers.
Oh joy.
Basically, again, watch where the hands are coming from and which color represents. If you're not on the ideal platform, changing to the color that is represented by the hands, because there is no way for you to actually dodge these.
That's clever.
Otherwise.
You need to be the opposite color to damage her, but that also makes
But
you
you need to be on the
vulnerable to
same
her
color,
attacks.
yes. Again, it's a very simple way this game does, and yet it gets so creative. I really like it for this.
I'm surprised this game didn't get more franchising or sequels. Like maybe it just didn't get much exposure.
Again, it was a simple budgeted, digital title that Ubisoft allowed Housemarque to do back in the day. Probably, as a sort of experimentation they were going from, but probably did not care much aside from it. Again, pretty much of a shame. I still believe that there is some potential in this.
Oh, Deji. Could you imagine if
There we go.
the whole subverting expectations thing? Could you imagine if that starts to infect pro wrestling?
I'm surprised it hasn't already.
I mean, wasn't that basically this year in a nutshell? I mean, last year in a nutshell.
Okay. Well, here's the thing, Dwebs. Subverting expectations has been a thing in wrestling for a long time. It's not like
Money in the
I meant
Bank
to-
is literally that.
Once the High Priestess led the gods in their holy rites. She knew the secrets of the heavens and the earth, blessing their creation, and she studied the cycle of ages.
So what went
But-
wrong?
Fell off the cycle?
Alas, she learned too much and sought to join in the unmaking.
Oh,
of faith.
she had an
If
existential crisis.
you read too much books, you will become a sociopath. Is that what you're telling me, game? And now you can use the teleports. Using those particular circles, like the one on your right, you will be able to teleport between those particular checkpoints that you already visited. Again, a pretty nifty tool.
Anyway, Dribs,
It's
just
very similar to the Castlevania Symphony of the Night type of teleports.
But we're technically reading stuff from a fictional book in this game now, so does it mean we're all going to be psychopaths?
Well, here's hoping not, I guess. Anyway,
Alright, join us in the next part where we unmake the universe.
that's for the final part, Waves. See ya.
Yeah.
See ya.